regarding installing foam insulation on roofs was he said that he often installs this foil-faced EPS on top of these houses, and that he's had sunburned nostrils from that experience. Which...
Yeah. Whew.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by GBA Senior Editor Kiley Jacques.
Hello.
FineHomebuilding.com Editor Rob Watzak.
Hey there.
Producer Jeff Rose.
Hello.
Fine Homebuilding Editorial Director Brian Pontalillo.
Hey, everyone.
And Fine Homebuilding Deputy Editor Matt Milham.
How's it going?
This is like the extreme version of the podcast. I think you all will agree.
Turbo
We are just
podcast.
amping it up a notch with extra folks on here. And it's because we're celebrating in some part today a special milestone. And would you like to share what that is, Matt?
Well, we're celebrating me leaving. I guess if you want to call it a celebration. I'm sure a lot of people will be relieved not to have to listen to me on the podcast anymore.
That is not true.
No way.
It's not
No way.
true.
No.
No, I wanted to have a special version of the podcast because I have enjoyed the time we spent together so much, and thank you for that.
Yeah, I've had a great time here. And I love fine home building. And as much as I would like to stay, I also have this itch to build that needs to be scratched. So I got to try it.
It's not unheard of amongst the Fine Home Building editorial staff to get the itch and then go do it, right, Brian?
Yeah, it's happened to many editors along the way, myself included. But this is a tough one. We've all really liked working with Matt, so I'm refusing a little bit to celebrate. I'm resisting. I'm silently resisting to celebrate. But I do look forward. I mean, what would be great is to have Matt back on the podcast in 6 months and to hear a little bit about what he's been doing and what he's been learning since everyone's, we all love him, and everyone, and many of our listeners, I assume some of them, Matt, feel the same way as us. At least I'll be interested to hear what you've been up to.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I hope you'll agree to do that because we all want to know what it's going to be like out there for you. You're going to have to get back in shape, dude.
Yeah, it's the first thing that's probably going to happen naturally, I hope.
Well, can you tell people about the firm that you're going to, the company that you're going to be working with?
Yeah, I don't know if they really want me talking about it or not,
okay.
but I'll throw it out there. I don't think they would be upset about it. It's called The Art of Building. They're in Rhinebeck, New York. Design build firm. They're relatively small, trying to grow, and they do fantastic work. The stuff is just really beautiful. They pay really close attention to details, and I mean, it's probably a place in some senses I think Justin Fink would love, because a lot of their work is with old houses and restoring them carefully and beautifully, and that's right up his alley. But they also do new builds, like really modern stuff that Kiley, I think you would really like too. So
Yeah, that's what's interesting about that company, is that they do lots of different styles and projects, and it'll keep it interesting for you.
Yeah,
what are you hoping to be working on, Matt? Do you hope to be working on old houses or new builds, or does it matter to you?
Honestly, I'd like to do a bit of both. I mean, new builds, I like the idea of them because there's so much, it seems like there's less to go wrong, and like you can kind of predict things because you get to, basically decide what goes where and everything. And with
all
old
of our
buildings,
custom home builders are just like ripping the hair out of their head right now hearing you say that.
Yeah. But I mean, I think it's trickier with old homes because there are a lot more problems that you can introduce. So there's a lot more, and not that it's, easy necessarily to think through the problems that can occur with a new house, but I think it's even trickier when you start dealing with old homes and, you can't just do exactly what you would do with a new home. Especially if you're in a historical zone and you have to preserve things, which I know I've railed about on this podcast before, that some of that stuff is stupid, and I still think it is, but it is what it is sometimes, and you got to be smart about it.
I wanted to we normally talk about our own projects at this time, this portion of the show, but I wanted to talk about some of your projects that you've talked about on the podcast, because I think it's a great trip down memory lane. So what's your favorite home project that you've talked about on the podcast, Matt?
Probably my favorite and most frustrating was the gazebo.
The reciprocal roof, right?
Yeah, the stupid reciprocal roof. It's still not completely done. I still haven't finished the top of it because I just cannot think of, I've tried a bunch of different things, but it's, it is sort of in a state of completion. It looks done-ish. The one that I probably liked that I actually finished is the garden shed.
I love your potting shed. I think that's a cool little building. What I love about that is all the salvaged and kind of oddball stuff you were able to integrate in there.
Yeah. A lot of that stuff was bought beforehand so that I could size all the openings to it.
Yeah.
It was kind of like backwards thinking with a bunch of that. I wasn't ordering things for. Yeah.
What'd you say, Kiley?
That's what gives it so much character.
Yeah.
Matt,
What's your favorite?
I think the most impressive project that you did, at least in my mind, was what you did to your mudroom, for lack of a better word. I know it's your breezeway.
Yeah.
All of the built-ins that you did there. That looks
and that still isn't finished either. There's still a pile of plywood in there to finish some more stuff. Actually, there's like a whole nother bank of cabinets that I was going to build in there. So we'll see. That's got to get done.
Maybe as a going away present for him, we just need to all head over there and help him wrap some of these projects up.
I find it quite ironic he's leaving Taunton to become a builder when he's got all this stuff around his own house that it could be finished, and it's never going to get done now that you're doing it 40, 50 hours a week.
Yeah, maybe. The nice thing is that I'm going to be nice and close. Not that I haven't been working from home for the last, almost year and a half, but, all of these projects are going to be, within probably a 20-minute drive of my house. So that's nice.
That is.
I'll be done early. So builder's hours are nice hours in that, you start early, end early.
So you can start working on your own stuff at, 4 o'clock, right? Or
exactly.
5. Yeah.
Yep.
What's your favorite project of Matt's, Brian?
That's my favorite project of Matt's.
He wasn't even around for some of it, I think.
Yeah, I wasn't around for a lot of those projects. All I've been hearing about since I've been back is Frisbee golf.
Yeah. That's true.
I did have one of the fun memories is we built and installed a mantle at Matt's house for a Fine Homebuilding article. Justin Fink wanted to publish an article on one of his techniques for building and installing mantles, and Matt said, well, Matt had just bought his house, I believe. He said, come on over and do it at my place. So we spent a couple days over there. Basically, Matt and I watching Justin work. It was great.
You guys got to use my 1950s era pink and black bathroom.
Right, that's right.
I think it's hideous.
We took some heat from that when you tore out that bathroom, right? Folks who were committed to the preservation of America's pink bathrooms were very upset that you tore that out of there.
It's not even really ripped out. The gray toilet was taken out and the old vanity was taken out, but the the pink tile is still there. It's just under paint.
Oh, right. We did that.
What do you think about all this, Jeff? You were kind of shocked when I told you this was all coming down, right?
Yeah, I'm kind of seriously bummed. I wanted to pick Matt's brain because I'm going to be working on my deck soon, and I just since he's done so many of them for Mastered in a Minute.
Well, I'm not dead, Jeff. I'm just moving jobs. I can still answer questions.
Speaking of which, so we've talked about outsolation specifically on roofs a number of times in the podcast, both recently and in the past. And we asked for folks who have done this, and we heard from our friend Dave from Vermont. And I can't read his whole letter, but I'll talk about his experience installing. It's pretty great. I just listened to episode 374 and responding to the ask for thoughts and comments on rooftop outsolation. I've done a bunch of them here in Vermont and have a lot of opinions. First, it's great. It's always an excellent thing to add continuous layers of insulation, be it walls, subslab, roofs, human heads, whatever. I'm a fan. Second, it's brutal work. Done right, it's no less than 2 to several layers of 4x8 thick, rigid insulation layered over each other with staggered seams. It isn't as tough as plywood or OSB, so it's significantly more difficult to work on top of, and it gets banged up pretty easy. Add to that, you need to seal the seams for it to be right and proper air seal. We use 3M 8067 tape for this, since other tapes just don't hold up. We're generally using foil-faced EPS foam, though other foam products would work too. I haven't used mineral board for this yet, as the rooftop version seems just too heavy to use on an existing home. Lastly, hitting the rafters through 8 inches of foam board with 12-inch headlock screws is a challenge. We're working on old houses with round pole rafters generally, which is hard enough. If you're driving the screws even a little off of perpendicular to the 2x strapping, you're liable to miss your mark. Also, we need to hit every rafter of the roof system for it to work, which for an older home is some kind of non-layout, almost seems certainly unworkable. So here's the bottom line, though. It takes between 22 and 35 hours, 0.22 to 0.35 hours per square foot to pull one of these off. It depends on a lot of factors, of course, like pitch and roof complexity. So for a 12 square roof, you're billing out, say, $60 a labor hour. It's $15,840 to $25,000 just for the labor alone, which comes as a sticker shock to many clients. So there you go. I think that's why you don't see a lot of that done, because it's crazy expensive, right? I mean, how much energy could you save?
Well, yeah, probably not that much.
That's the thing, is like extreme insulation retrofits of any kind are some of the most labor intensive and tricky jobs to pull off. So as much as we would love every single house in the country to be, insulated to the best modern standards, it's a tall order.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if we look at Payback, it's almost never going to be there. So if we look at return on investment, it starts to look a little more promising. But if Payback's the factor, the answer is usually
what's the difference between
don't do it.
Return on investment versus payback, Brian?
Oh, I don't know. You have to ask Mike Mahan. No, the very basic dumbed down version is that payback is when your savings over a certain amount of time add up to the money that anyone jump in when I go off base here, but when your savings add up to the money spent on the project. So a payback period, you've saved enough over 5 years to pay for the insulation that you added to your roof. Return on investment is that the savings are a better investment, are saving you enough money that it was worth doing it. And one of the ways the example that people usually give is, you could take that money and you could spend it on insulation on your roof. Maybe it lowers your heating and cooling bills by $100 a month. Could you spend the same amount of money and make more than $100 a month investing? So it's like,
if you had that money available,
what else could you do with it is the question. So that's my really bad understanding of the difference between the two.
Well, and one argument as the technologies and materials have evolved from, like, let's say the beginning of Green Building Advisor, like when 2009, when we really started digging in deep onto these types of topics, solar was super expensive and only wealthy early adopters were putting it on houses, and people were still putting in hot water solar systems. Now, with the complexity of a hot water solar system and with a lot of heating systems that people could do and insulation, it's like a lot of times you're just better off spending your money on more solar if you've got a good location for it. And some people don't like that idea of, like, it's sort of like buying carbon credits. Like, make a really wasteful house, but just buy more solar panels to pay for it. But if it works for you from a budget standpoint, it makes sense for a lot of people.
Dave concludes by saying, P.S. I read about the Plywood Satellite you all were talking about and thought to myself, well, of course the government would wait for plywood to be over $100 a sheet before trying this. Okay, so...
Hey, he mentioned a product, mineral board for this application. Do you know anybody? He said it's super duper heavy. And so, he's not interested in that. But do you know anybody who's used that?
On a roof?
Yeah.
No.
Just curious.
No.
Mineral
Have you guys
board.
seen anyone do that?
I don't think I've seen it on a roof yet.
Yeah.
No, I've seen Gutex on a roof. That's
Yeah,
it.
that's what made me think of it.
Yeah.
I heard that plan's coming online pretty soon, right? Is it next year? The
I
North
don't
American
know.
Gutex
They've been
plant?
saying the same thing for
I
years,
know.
it seems like.
Oh, that is true.
I mean, the last news story that Scott Gibson wrote about it was saying that their soft products were going to be coming online in 2022, and then the boards would be later.
That's
maybe in
right.
20.
Oh, well, I'll have to keep waiting for that. Okay, so this comes from Barbara, our friend, and hello again, FHB podcasters. Greetings from Zone 2, where condensation forms on the outside of our windows in the summer, not on the underside of our roof in the winter. Y'all really came down hard on Casey in Alabama. You build your house with open cell foam under the roof and a tongue and groove pine cathedral ceiling, Casey, and it will be just fine. Don't listen to these guys. Did you forget one of the biggest appeals in real wood and building science? It's a humidity buffer. A tongue and groove pine ceiling over open cell foam in Alabama is great. Unfinished for preference. The wood will take up excess moisture in the air, and in a few weeks, a year, when you run a heater, the wood will give off the extra moisture and keep it from feeling parched inside. You also seem to assume all spray foam is urethane. Down here, they spray isonine foam. The insulation contractor I use doesn't even do urethane foam. Isonine is acceptable for multiple chemical sensitivities, unlike urethane. The fact that it's open cell instead of closed cell is of no consequence. It still air seals really well. Isn't isonine also a form of urethane?
I did a little poking around on this, and it is a urethane foam. I think one of the things is that it uses more natural oils instead of petroleum-based oils. I think that's what more the point to make here is that that's why it's okay. It's better for certain sensitivities, but I don't know. I don't really know. I remember isonine was one of the first spray foams we used to hear about and write about early on, but I did some looking, and it is a type of urethane foam.
She says, in hot human land, you only need R8 under a roof to stop condensation. Anything more than that is a luxury. When I had my walls in my house sprayed with isonine, I said, hey, could you go ahead and spray the underside of the metal roof too? And they had it done before I had time to run the numbers and see what R value I was going to get. I was going to use bats on the roof, but they were already here, and I started thinking foam would help deaden the noise of rain. They didn't fill all the space between the 2x8 rafters up there and cut off the extra like the walls. It's like a flash and bat job. I couldn't get the bats I wanted in small quantities, so I left them out. I put 1x6 tongue and groove longleaf pine onto my walls, plus the ceiling of my bathroom, right over the open cell foam. The bathroom! And I have not had a single moisture problem in 16 years. No cupping, no mold, no condensation. It's definitely not airtight, which is evident when it rains. It's a lot louder in that room with a tongue and groove ceiling compared to the loft with an airtight ceiling. Well, so, there you go.
She proved us wrong. Right?
Well, I don't know. Open cell foam is risky in a cold climate for sure. I'm sure it's more forgiving in a hot place like Barbara's in Georgia.
I'm surprised there's not cupping, honestly. She says the wood takes up moisture in the air and then releases it later.
Wood cups, I think, when the drying cycles are fast, right, on one side. So the
when it's different on one side than the other, right? It could also be that you have a lot of moisture on one side of the board and not on the other, and it's going to cup on the moisture-heavy side.
Yeah.
Barbara wants to talk about Kiley's septic system, which we all do, of course. After Kiley's septic story, I went looking for my receipts because your price estimates for septic work made me incredulous. When I built my house in 2005, the septic permit guy misunderstood what I was building and sized my system for a 3-bedroom house. When he came to inspect the installation and saw the tiny house under construction, he realized he'd vastly oversized it. But they'd already dug the trenches and brought in truckload after truckload of drain rock. They even brought in an extra half truckload for me to spread out to park my car on. I guess septic system installers are doing okay down here if they can just give away rock for free to people who they feel sorry for because their house is so small. I paid $495 for a 1,000-gallon concrete septic tank installed. They charged me $2.50 per square foot of drain field, which was a total of $1,875. Why does it cost an order of magnitude more up there? What is going on in New England with you backhoe operators and cast concrete companies? Here they make septic tanks locally. Don't they make them there? Why are you pushing plastic ones? I'm not pushing plastic septic tanks. I think concrete is better. Where are those made? Maybe crushed lime rock is a lot cheaper here because the whole region was once recently under the sea. Well, I don't know, but that is stupidly cheap, Barbara.
Well, I mean, she asks if they make them locally, and I think anything masonry based, concrete based is done locally because the most expensive part of anything like that is the transportation cost of the materials and the finished products. And I was sizing concrete tanks for a potential pool from our backyard, and it was thousands of dollars. So, I mean, that probably speaks to the local labor costs and.
I mean, when you get ready mix delivered, it's $100 a yard. So think about how many yards of concrete go into a concrete septic tank. It's
So I'm sure it varies greatly depending on where you are and what labor and land costs are in different parts of the country.
So I asked my septic installer, who was pushing the plastic tanks, what's the preference there? And he said a few things, one of which, of course, it's much easier for them to work with. It's light.
He can pick it up. You don't need a crane.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's that. But he also was talking about the watertight properties and that it doesn't corrode and it's rust resistant and it's less prone to cracking and it's somehow considered more hygienic. So those were the reasons he gave. And if you can, she asked about sourcing things, who makes these. And the largest manufacturer that I could find is Norwesco. And they have 13 different manufacturing facilities. They started in Minnesota, but there is one close by to here in Owego, New York. So plastic septic tanks. That's what I have.
All right. I loved your description of a septic tank as hygienic in any.
Right, I know. That gave me pause. No question.
Someone's going to correct you on Owego. I think it's Owego.
Owego?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank God I have you. Thank God you're still around.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, I think, grew up near there, so
Yep.
You should know too.
Ian wrote in on the same subject. Hey, podcasters, here is the background of the FHB House, Wisconsin's septic system. Out here in the middle, we are mound system country. Our county health department sizes mound systems by the bedroom. Even though our house is a 2-bedroom, we put in a 3-bedroom mound. Our excavation contractor is a licensed septic system designer and installer. His price for a 2-bedroom system was $13,800, and a 3-bedroom system was $15,000. I asked him what the difference is, and he said the tank is the same size, but every bedroom adds about 15 feet of length to the mound. So they have clay soil, so you need the sand mound to percolate through and clean the effluent. So. It always surprises me what people are interested in on this show, isn't it?
Yeah. Septic is a topic that never fails.
I think it's because it's so much money and people really find it very mysterious. And, it's one of the great variables in terms of the cost to build on a lot, right? You could have a septic system that costs a few $1,000s, or you could have one that costs tens of thousands.
Yeah.
Yeah. And aside from
it's scary. You don't know what it's going to cost.
Yeah, because it depends a lot on the local site conditions, but also I'm sure it depends a whole lot on what the regulations are in your area. Because some people can get away with a simple tank and gravel drain field, and some people need more intricate piping systems to distribute it. And sounds like something we need to write an article on, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's probably not a cover feature, right, Brian?
It might not be a cover feature.
This comes from B. Hi, guys. I hope this email gets to you in time for your next podcast. I can imagine your inbox is jam-packed with questions from people like me, but I'm hoping you could steer me in the right direction regarding our first custom build in Climate Zone 2, Houston. Anyway, we have some dilemmas going on. We're trying to choose between 2x6 studs with full fill open cell spray foam insulation on the inside part of the wall versus a combo of 2x4 studs with 3.5 inches of nominal fill open cell spray foam plus 1 inch of some sort of exterior rigid foam insulation. We're trying to figure out if we want the premium Rockwool Comfort Board 80 or just the Dowboard Owens Corning Pink Foamular XPS board. We have a stiff budget. Cool. Anyway, I'd be happy with choosing the XPS rigid foam combined with the nominal 3.5 inches of spray foam on the inside of the exterior wall, but knowing that XPS foam can have a thermal shift due to shrinkage over time, plus the attraction of ants and termites have to it, makes me want to rethink and choose rock wool instead, which is more expensive. Unfortunately, I'm still working on finding out the price comparison of these two products. If I go with rock wool, it'll probably be the thinnest they have, which is 1.25 inches, as we are hot and humid Houston. My builder doesn't think that open cell spray foam on the inside of he thinks the open cell spray foam on the inside of the wall is more than enough for our needs, and that it's overkill to try and add to that. But with my research, it seems like air leakage is a big deal to have to manage besides bulk water. Good thing is, we as the homeowners have the last say on what ends up in our future home. Can you please help? I am desperate. I enjoy your guys' friendly candor on your podcast, and I've certainly learned a whole lot binging on all your episodes. Okay, so what are our two wall assemblies? The builder wants to just do 2x4 wood sheathed wall, 2x6, excuse me, with open cell in the cavities, and they're considering doing this other wall with a double stud wall, right?
No, I think they were going to do, the alternative is 2x4 with the 3.5 inches of
foam and then
open cell, and then inch of rigid on the outside.
My bad. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're basically going with about the same amount of insulation value, but just trying to decide whether that it's a good idea to add the exterior insulation and which one to go with.
Yeah.
Brian and I have had this conversation very recently, coincidentally, right, Brian?
Yeah, well, yes, we have, and we've had this. I mean, we've had this insulation so much over time, and you know, it's either one is a big improvement over the code minimum R value in climate zone 2, I believe, because I think you can get away with R13 in climate zone 2. So a 2x6 wall with open cell foam is going to get you well over code minimums, and so is a 2x4 wall with some exterior rigid foam. Did she imply that they would be relying on the exterior insulation for the air barrier?
That was my impression, and yeah, that's not going to do it. But
yeah, so you first thing to do is plan your air barrier at your sheathing, and not rely on either one of these insulations for your air seal, because it's easier and I think more durable to put your air barrier at your sheathing. So taped sheathing, basically. There's some other details we don't have, we can't get into now, but basically taped sheathing is where you want to put your air barrier. And then, then you could use mineral wool on the outside if you chose to. You could use any type of insulation that you wanted in the walls. So that would be the first thing that I would suggest, is don't look at either of these insulation materials as your air barrier.
Yeah.
But some people think it's heresy. Is that the right word, heresy? To not sheathe the house with plywood or OSB, but I mean, a lot of folks, or not, some folks put on a foam insulation layer with either plywood corner bracing or lead-in bracing or steel wind bracing or some other bracing method, and that allows you to use only foam as the sheathing layer, and you would have to tape that, right, in that instance, right?
Yes, then you'd have to do that or something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I highly doubt they're doing that in hurricane country.
It wouldn't make
Houston.
sense in Houston,
yeah.
Right? But what about a brick house? When I was in Houston, there was almost all the homes were brick, and as near as I could tell, under the brick they mostly had foam sheathing and not, a wood sheathing product.
Yeah.
That, or they had that, I forget what it's called, thermoply, which is like kind of this cardboard material that is also, a sheathing material, but it's not as robust as, CDX or OSB.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're not using structural sheathing, then that's not an option. So then you do have to come up with something else. And it could be that you detail your rigid foam sheathing as an air barrier. It could be that you rely on some sort of spray foam insulation as your air barrier, though, by all accounts, and that's unreliable over time. It could be that you use a membrane or drywall inside. So there are other options. But if you had, I think, from what I've learned over the last few years, as air sealing has become, more and more an issue in home building, is that if you have sheathing. If you have structural sheathing, it's the kind of most foolproof and most durable place to locate your air barrier.
And do you think you get better blower test numbers if you use plywood or OSB versus taped foam? Like, is that an effective air barrier, as an effective air barrier?
I don't know if the question is a better blower door numbers right away, but like she mentioned, foam is known to shrink and move, and so and over time, and I think in more dramatic ways than sheet goods. So I think over time you might have just like using spray foam. I think you can get good air sealing done immediately, but over time it's known to not be as reliable.
What about her original question, though? Which wall would you all choose? Would you put 2x6s and make it easy to build? Or are you going to add this foam layer for, what is it, probably R4, 5 maybe? If you did polyiso, it might be 5, 6.
Well, the thing is, if they're going with 2x6 studs filled with foam, if foam is definitely what they're going to put inside the walls, the simplest wall to build would be a 2x6 wall filled with foam, if they're set on putting foam in the walls.
What about the thermal bridging, Rob, to play devil's advocate here? What's your response to that?
24-inch centers.
Just have less studs, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, that's my answer, because that's still, I mean, the amount of insulation in the cavities is still going to be more than the cavities plus 1-inch exterior if you were going with a 2x4 wall. I mean, that doesn't mean that I haven't done the math to see if the R value of that assembly necessarily is overall higher, but they're going to be very comparable.
And it's going to be a lot easier to build, would be my point.
Oh, so much easier. Yeah.
Especially if you've got a builder who is not used to detailing an exterior air barrier and rigid foam with the rain screen details and all that stuff, and dealing with all the window flashing details. I mean, we talk about things like the double stud walls. One of the reasons why that's a good assembly is because any builder can build it. So if you have a builder who's not excited about doing out of the ordinary details, I would give them a detail that they can do reliably.
I agree. I think that's such an important point whenever we're answering questions to homeowners who are going to be hiring things. If the contractor's not comfortable with it, it's probably not a good idea to push them to do it.
Yeah.
You're either going to pay a lot more than you should because to cover their risk and the learning curve associated with that, or you're going to end up with a bad result, right? Because they've underestimated whatever project it is that you're asking them to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if they came into the if you presented that in the meeting and they said, "I'd love to try that," great, because they're excited, they're going to do their research. But if they're like, "I don't think so," and that's where I think you take your cue to either find another builder if you really want to go down that road, or let them do what they know how to do well.
Mm-hmm.
Very specifically, Brian, I want to ask you this. So you've done this. You've put exterior foam on a house, and would you do it again?
I would if given the same situation. I had that was a remodel of a house with in a cold climate with 2x4 framing, and a very small house too. So interior options like adding a double wall or adding foam inside weren't viable options. It is just I was just sort of remembering it when when we were reading the feedback on putting foam on a roof. I found it to be infuriating work. A sheet for one thing, a 4x8 sheet of 2-inch rigid foam is not as heavy as a 4x8 sheet of plywood or OSB. But when the wind grabs it and you're on a ladder, it's no fun. And then, like he mentioned about trying to find rafters, trying to find framing through 2 inches of rigid foam is next to impossible.
It's a pain.
And even when you know exactly where the framing is, like that fastener,
it only has to be off a fraction of a degree by the time it gets to that.
Yeah, and the longer the screw you drive, the more chance you have of not hitting something.
Yes.
What I've seen people do is get insulation support, that really like razor sharp piece of heavy wire, and you poke through it to find the thing down there, and then you drill the hole.
That's smart.
And I've seen some examples of builders who put the furring strips on the wall first.
I was just going to say that.
Fed the foam behind it, and then drove the fasteners to snug the foam to the wall, which is a different way to go about it. It feels like it would be. Well, I don't know. I might try it next time.
either that or go to the ridge and the eaves and put some kind of a guide block with all kinds of markings where you find the framing. But that's assuming that the rafters are straight, like something you could hook a string to at each course,
Oh, I see. Yeah. Or even just a piece of lumber, right? A piece of strapping that went from ridge to eave.
But like Patrick said, that you still have to drive those fasteners straight. You go off a little bit and you miss it, And, yeah.
Matt, how would you do it? This is the Matt show, so I want to know how you do it. You would make it as complicated as
you might have to do this, dude. You're gonna...
yeah. Pretend this is your first job.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do like the idea of kind of, getting the furring up there and slipping it behind. Another thing that I've seen that seemed to work, although, I mean, you may, hurt the R value a little bit, is to put some strapping up on the walls to begin with, fit the pieces between that, and then the second layer goes over all of that. So you have that to sort of fit between, and then the second layer ends up holding, everything else in place. So.
Yeah, I think compromises that might, a little compromise in R value in some places to make the job a lot easier would pay off,
One other thing I didn't read that I regret from Dave's letter regarding installing foam insulation on roofs was he said that he often installs this foil-faced EPS on top of these houses, and that he's had sunburned nostrils from that experience. Which...
Yeah. Whew.
But back to B's question, I mean, if they're going with exterior insulation and they're in termite country, I don't know, is exterior rigid foam, you just got to detail the bug guards really well.
I thought we told her to spray foam the interior anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I'm saying if that would be the easiest way, but if they were dead set and they had a builder who was willing to do this, maybe the rock would be a safer bet.
I would want that EPS that has borates in it, I think.
Yeah, that's a good choice too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a termite strip supposedly does a good job. I guess those things are real stupid. We don't have them around here, but my understanding is they basically run into that little strip of metal and just go, and turn right around.
Well, and they also have termite treatments probably every few months too, right? As part of just like living in Houston, and folks who live there will correct me, I suspect, but I think you just have to have a termite person come all the time.
Brian, when we were in Austin, I seem to recall them talking about the builder that we were talking with. They also treat all around the foundation, don't they? All around the soil, right? Is that common practice to do that?
I think so.
Is that something you have to do annually?
Regularly.
Yeah.
The more modern termite killing chemicals are not as persistent, right? For the sake of other critters, but that means you have to apply it more often. This comes from Evan of Mountaineer Builders, LLC. Hey, podcast crew, can we discuss metal connectors? It is my general feeling that brackets such as post bases, caps, rafter hangers, hurricane tides are not used as much as they should be. There are still people around here, Boone, North Carolina, that put their deck posts right into concrete. Should we not by now have more universal integration of structural connectors? I would like to know what everyone's thoughts are and advice are as to using these kinds of products, and for those listeners not already adopting them, why they should. Then I have an additional question. Do any of you see particular advantages or weaknesses to any style or brand of connector? The way I run my post bases or anchor bolts is with strong tie Titan screws. This I picked up from Kyle Stumpenhorst of R&R Buildings and more recently of the Pro Talk podcast. He, however, has another method of cast-in-place post bases that have 4 rebar rods. Attaches a picture of such a product at install. I saw on Instagram a response he made to the many saying that his bases need 90-degree bends. His engineer had certified that the rebar at their length provided enough friction to resist uplift. Could you talk more about how this works? Did you guys look at that photograph? So Kyle is holding this U-shaped bracket, right? And it's got holes in it. And they put rebar through the holes that is cast in what looked like a cast-in-place grade beam, right? Isn't that what I was looking at?
I did not see that. And so it's regular rebar?
So, I mean, if the engineer says it works and your code official says that's okay, then that's all you need to do. And I mean, I can't imagine how much force it takes to pull a 2-foot piece of rebar out of cast concrete, let alone 4 of them. It's insane, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, rebar's got all those ridges on it, so it's not like you're pulling a smooth rod out. Did you post a picture of that on, or you're talking about in his actual episode, you had a picture of it?
No, he put I think it was a link to a photo in that email.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, so metal connectors are great. They've really improved the, resilience of wood frame structures for very little money, I would say. Like, the buildings in the Midwest now can routinely survive, class 1 and 2 tornadoes with pretty little damage.
I remember seeing some houses after Hurricane Katrina, and it was an article that was suggesting that the difference between the destruction done to houses that didn't have this kind of reinforcement was significant. They attributed the fact that some remained standing to metal connectors, which I thought was really,
decks are made way better through connectors too. Like, we used to have ledger strips and stuff to hold up deck joists that would catch water and, become a source of rot, right?
Yeah. I mean, each individual piece is inexpensive, but when you add them all up, for everything that goes into a roof and into a deck, I mean, you're talking about thousands of dollars in metal. And I can see why some people, houses have stood for a very long time with just nails. Why some people are reluctant to, spend the extra money for this stuff, even though I would say that it's absolutely safer and, it allows you to build a house that's going to stand up to a lot of that stuff a lot better than they used to. But, I understand the argument the other way too.
There are definitely ways to use less, I'm sure, but like a post base, putting that right in concrete, that is definitely not the right way to go, because you're only gonna encourage that post to rot. You put the post base up there, you get some drying. It's not totally sitting in a bucket of water. What it amounts to, right? It's the water seeps around that post between the concrete and the post, and it's gonna be wet in there.
Yeah. Unless you want to use one of those post-wrap type products, there's different asphalt and plastic-based ones, but then you're getting into the same cost as if you just put, actually more probably than if you just did the hardware, if you're doing a concrete basis. So yeah, I mean, we're talking about longevity and safety, and I guess in some parts of the country, this stuff isn't required because of the local codes they've adopted, or at least not enforced. But I mean, especially in high wind areas, a lot of the education and building codes that we have are because insurance companies don't want to pay for houses being blown away or decks falling off the sides of houses, Yeah.
Well said, Rob. It's really a lot of what I see, the changes in the industry are resulting from insurance company making decisions on who to insure and or who not to, right?
Yeah. And as people are building closer to storm areas or more elaborate decks, I mean, people spend a lot of money on a deck. So, I mean, a couple of extra $100 and maybe even $1,000 or a couple extra $1,000 for most decks is, it's a noticeable portion of the budget. But I mean, you don't want those things to fall down.
This comes from Carina, and Carina, thanks for writing. I can't read all of your email, but we'll get to what we can. Okay, I'm building a house. It's really bad timing with high prices and low availability for basically everything, but I'm hoping with some serious prep, that's our current phrase, prep, I'll be able to order everything with enough lead time. I'm in Idaho, where incidentally there actually are building codes and people who take it pretty seriously. And until I began actively assimilating information to prepare for this project, I had never heard or seen a zip system, that rain gap that I had needed between the siding and sheathing, and many other things. You can be scared for me. I am. Side note, I grew up helping in my dad's construction projects, which are many considering it is not his profession. This whole build my own house thing is currently way over my head, as it should be. Zip seems pretty straightforward for builders to do right, despite never working with it. My question, sorry it took a minute, is about the difference between having a vapor barrier, with which, if I understand correctly, is something everyone needs in order to have a tight house that has control over air/water vapor sneaking in, and also having some form of escape for potential condensation. So should we stop right there and say what she's talking about is an air barrier, right? Not a vapor barrier. We're talking about air control layers when we're talking about vapor movement moving through a stream of air, right?
I hope that's what she's talking about.
I hope that's what she's talking about. Anyway, she says the house is a big rectangle, slab on grade, gable roof, one main level with an upstairs pony walls and a big shed dormer to create a second floor. I'm not even going to try to build it correctly, according to at least one of your shed dormer articles. It goes right up to the edge of the building, creating basically a 2-story wall there, what we've been describing as a greedy dormer. And you shouldn't be putting your upstairs on pony walls, Carina, because that's a very weak connection. You should have balloon frame walls if you're going to do a half wall at the top. Putting a half wall on top of a full wall with a roof load on it makes this hinge point, and the walls will push out either right away or eventually. Also, the walls will be 2x6 studs. We're seriously considering 24-inch on center for both less in thermal bridging and less lumber to buy. We'll use fiberglass bats inside, probably, and attached with the attached vapor retarder and 2 inches of rigid foam on the exterior. We're still pricing siding and roofing options. Our first choice is metal for both. The siding would be basic corrugated. Remember, I'm in Idaho. If this sounds like a barn, that's great. I'm going to add a few traditional barn accents so we don't end up with a warehouse. Bonus question, can I install siding directly onto rigid foam? I think yes, probably the screws need to reach past the foam and sheathing and get clear into the studs. Millions more questions, but I'll continue to attempt my own research. Thanks again for the great info and perspective. Carina says, P.S. My husband is an accountant, so hopefully for our sakes, AI doesn't take over construction for a while. I don't know if I understand that, but okay. That might have been a conversation we had at one time. Was AI going to take over construction or work? So what do you guys think about putting siding right on foam without any strapping?
Well, I guess it depends on corrugated. I assume most people are running that vertically. So in that case, you're probably going to want to run furring strips anyway, which gives you a nice air gap. That's not necessarily for the corrugated metal per se, but might be necessary for the fastening of the corrugated. Unless she's planning on running it horizontally, which then she could be fine running it right to the framing, I would think. But then we go to that problem we had earlier about trying to run long fasteners through foam.
Yeah.
I forget what the question was. The original question.
I think we need to have Katrina on the show, and we need to work through this project with her.
Yeah, because there are a lot of details here that could probably use a little bit more information for us to give the best answer possible.
Do you want to take a stab at any answer? Anyone? Go ahead, Kiley.
Well, she's concerned about water vapor, and really she should be more concerned about, and Brian mentioned this, or you brought up the air barrier is really what she should be concentrating on, right? Because vapor diffusion is less of an issue than, water moving through with air. So air is where you want to block water issues too, in a sense, right?
You should look at all those control layers individually first, and then if they get joined together in materials, great for the sake of efficiency. But first, just like you have your 4 control layers, which is what we're getting. She's almost named them all, but you have, your water control layer, your air control layer, your thermal control layer, and your vapor control layer. And the first thing that you do when designing these assemblies is identify how you're going to control those 4 things. And then, yes, if she chooses to use zip sheathing and she tapes it, and it becomes both her drainage plane, so the bulk of her water control layer and her air control layer, that's great. But if she looks at them separately first, she can get an understanding of what they all need to do. Likewise, if you, it's less common, but likewise, if you did some sort of a membrane inside of many people in the many passive house builders use a variable perm vapor retarder on the inside of their house and detail it as the air barrier as well. So you can combine it. You could combine things there. But first and foremost, she needs to know what these controls are, what the purpose is, and how she's going to employ them in her building assemblies.
And don't do that pony wall on the story and a half.
You're stuck on that, aren't you?
She said she doesn't want to design a warehouse, but I think the first thing I thought when she was talking about the pony walls and the shed dormer, first thing I thought was just add a second floor.
Yeah.
I know it takes away the character she's looking for, but it's going to be less expensive, easier to build, and easier to detail for all these control layers.
And you want to know what? If you don't want the greedy dormer look, add some external details that break up the lines. Like add a little porch roof wall, even if it's only a foot or two deep, just to sort of break up that vertical line there.
Yeah, and I mean, it's important that we like the way our houses look, of course. Just when you start to hear all the complexity, sometimes if you really need all that space under the roof, like sometimes the second floor is just a better route.
And it makes your roof insulation so much easier if you have a flat ceiling versus a sloping ceiling. It's like so many problems go away.
Yeah. And then there's her siding question, which I don't think we really ever finished talking about. I mean, she didn't say how much exterior insulation there will be, and that matters whether or not you could nail through it and reach framing.
Oh, no, she did say 2 inches of rigid foam.
She said 2 inches of rigid foam.
Yeah,
and she's assuming, and I'm assuming that she thinks she doesn't need any kind of furring strips because that corrugated siding is sort of self-draining and has some, and it's metal, so it's like the siding's less of an issue.
I think that would be hard to install without.
I think so too.
How would you get it flat?
Yeah, it's like, because as you could even do horizontal strapping even of 2x2 as you go, as you're applying the rigid foam, so that you're keeping track of where the framing is and work your way up the wall doing the strapping and the foam at the same time. It's kind of similar to what we were talking about with the roofing earlier. And so it just, from an installation simplicity standpoint, it just would be a lot easier, especially if you're running it vertically.
What do you think, Jeff? Sorry.
I was just going to say the layered approach that Matt mentioned before might make sense in this case, where you put the 2x on, infill with 1 inch of rigid foam, then do 1 inch continuous, and then you're only screwing through 1 inch of foam to those 2x for your siding.
Yeah, and the cost difference between layers of thinner rigid foam isn't going to be anything that's going to make any difference, and you have more opportunity to stagger seams in the foam, and possibly even tape all those seams to have multiple sort of bolt suspenders approach to air barrier.
Do you have thoughts on this, Jeff?
Am I recalling correctly that she said slab on grade?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think having a full second story is another advantage because she's not going to have storage.
Right?
Yeah.
That's probably the best answer.
Yeah, because the thing is, once you get to the greedy dormer, you're like 99% there. And so if you're only doing that on a new house, I mean, a lot of people do those on an existing house just because it's it's an easy way
to get more
add
square
space.
Footage, right? Yeah.
But if you're building a new house, design a 2-story house, and if you don't like that tall vertical wall, just come up, like I was saying earlier, with some architectural elements that can kind of break up those lines, and especially if you like that sort of barn look. So many barns have that sort of stepped look to them, where they have, even if it's not deep enough to be a true covered area, some sort of an extension that's a lower level, around outside. It could be as simple as, like when people add eaves to a house where they've wrapped the entire roof where it didn't have eaves before, they build like a ladder style little roof extension, and you could do that halfway up the wall just to sort of add some architectural details. and,
gonna love siding
protection
that.
for the flashing for the windows on the first floor too. It actually serves a purpose from a weather standpoint too.
Carina's roofer is gonna love that, Rob.
On her insulation, she also wants to make sure to pay attention to the proportion of insulation that she's putting in the cavities versus outside. I mean, if she's dead set on putting 2 inches exterior, make sure she's not putting too much on the interior, that it's going to prevent that sheathing from actually staying warm enough to be above the dew point. So
your point relates to vapor control, which was our original question, and it seems kind of interesting that we kind of got back there. But your point is that you have to have the right ratio of exterior insulation to interior to prevent the accumulation of vapor within the wall.
exactly.
Correct.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are proportions, it's all in the code. If you want an easy solution, just look up your climate zone in chapter 11. It'll tell you exactly what you need. I don't know exactly what climate zone she's in, but just follow those guidelines and you should be safe.
My guess is it's a cold one.
Yeah, I would think so. Idaho, right?
Yeah. This comes from Scott in Sammamish. Does anyone know if I said that correctly?
Sammamish.
Sammamish. Is it Massachusetts, Kiley?
No, it's Washington State.
Oh. Is that in the email?
I think so. I thought it was. Maybe just because I know it. No, it's not. You're right. It's
Okay. Hello, all. I enjoy listening to the podcast, even when you wax poetic about the virtues of air sealing. We love air sealing. We're considering modeling our kitchen built in the 1980s. We're looking at essentially new cabinets with the same basic layout, new appliances, and maybe the removal of a closet and installation of a small bar sink. We have to refinish the hardwood floors throughout the main floor of the house. Having received one bid that almost equaled the cost to build the house in 1986, we are now considering Plan B. What are your thoughts and experience with refinishing the cabinets in place? We would then install new hinges and drawer slides and new countertops. The cabinets are well built with plywood boxes and maple face frames and solid maple doors and fronts. The current finish is a pickled or whitewash stain with a varnished top coat. The varnish is yellowed a bit, as predicted when the cabinets were originally installed. Would love to get your thoughts and benefits on any of your experiences on our proposed Plan B. I will note that we live east of Seattle, where modeling contractors are picky about the projects they will even look at, and cabinet manufacturers are 4 to 5 months out for production. Thanks for your thoughts, Scott. So Fine Homebuilding has tackled this very subject, right, Brian? Phil Hansel did it once with me, and I think we've done it more recently than that, right?
Well, I know we have the issue that will be coming to people's mailboxes soon has a question about it, a Q&A about it. Phil lit it, but I don't think we've done it more recent than that. Anyway, we've covered it a bunch. I think if it's a project that they're going to tackle themselves, and if they have the time, patience to do it well, it's great. It's a great project, and you if you're doing it yourself, you will save a lot of money. I don't know if that's true of paying a pro to do it, but if you were to do it yourself, there's a lot of sweat equity in a project like that because the materials aren't. It's a labor-intensive process. It's not a material-intensive process.
I know Philip's case. I wanted to say it was like a third of the cost of new cabinets for him to spray those boxes for a big kitchen's worth of cabinets. It was really significant savings. And the whole process is spelled out in that article. Whether you show it to your pro and say do it this way, or you do it yourself, it's all there.
I guess the one thing to think about is, especially if you have like varnished or polyurethane as opposed to painted cabinets, you have to make sure that you do the right stuff to get new paint to stick to that. Because painting over old paint is no big deal, but painting over, I know this from experience, painting over polyurethane, if you don't use the right primer or get it down to bare wood, you're going to be, But the good thing is there are good primers that can stick to that. So you have to do a decent job sanding, and you have to use a high quality primer. And you're probably best going to, if you're going to do it yourself, going to like a pro level, paint store or local like high quality building supply store that sells paint, and getting some advice for them on like the right primer and paint to use together.
Or call a paint manufacturer would be what I would call their technical
of course,
line and
that's
ask
what you
them what to
always
do.
say, because they're the ones that know the best.
Yeah.
Get some advice from your local people, then get a second opinion from the tech line at the paint manufacturer itself.
I think this is a fantastic opportunity to buy a paint sprayer. That would be the reason I would want to do this myself.
Yeah. We've also got both article and video from Tyler Grace about spraying stuff on site with a lot of good tips too, and that's more recent than Philip's article, which there's tips in there more that are also more about sort of like preparing the job site too, because that's a big part of when you're dealing with something that you're working on in place.
Yeah, and I guess it becomes also a much more approachable project if you have a place to stage the doors and drawers, and so that you're not trying to do them in the kitchen. You can set them up on either tables or sawhorses or whatever, and be able to kind of work on them and leave them there, especially when you have a wet coat on them. So that's something to think about. Probably best if it's not outside. Otherwise, you're going to need sort of perfect conditions to get the kind of finish you want on cabinetry, and perfect conditions are rare.
Oh, and even when they're perfect 1 minute, they're not perfect a few minutes later when the bird flies over or what other eventuality is going to happen for sure.
Yeah. Hey, Rob, in the painting guide, do you cover cabinets?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I mean, there's sections where the articles that we're all talking about are in the painting guide. So if you just go to our homepage and go to finehomebuilding.com and then go to there, scroll down and find the project guides section. There's a painting guide, which you're going to find all kinds of good stuff. Also, tips on work on painting doors, because like one of the big problems with painting shelves and doors is that if you lay it down on a surface, you run the risk of like getting the paint stuck to the edges. So there's different tips for the people have shared with us over the years for building little jigs for holding doors, like using with screws or nails to kind of just pinch the doors in a way where you can paint the whole surface all at once. So there's a lot of ways you can make this job easier on yourself, and all that stuff is in the guide. Good point.
Do you want to go ahead with your quiz now, Brian?
The time?
It's time.
Oh no.
Okay. All right, Mr. Milham,
I'm hanging up now.
Your future employer may or may not be listening, and we have a 10-question quiz to see if you've actually learned anything in the past 2 years, and if we're going to take you back in 2 years. So, if you're ready, what's the max allowable rise for a stair?
Max allowable rise, man.
Yeah, that's very specific.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, New York State even has different rules than the IRC. I think we're allowed, it's 8 inches, I think, for us, but I think in general it's closer to 7 3/4.
All right, you nailed it. Which is in the lower position in a roof, collar tie or a rafter tie?
Rafter tie.
All right, 2 for 2. U value and our value and U factor have what relationship to one another?
R is 1 over U. U is 1 over R. Something like that.
Wow.
Or vice versa. Yeah.
Even better than I expected. You described the equation. We would have settled for inverse or reciprocal.
Right? Okay.
You're installing a footing drain. First day on the job. Perforated pipe. Holes up or holes down?
Oh, the age-old question. Holes down for me.
All right. Riving knives. They prevent what safety hazard?
The wood basically closing in on the back after you make the cut. I guess it would be kickback.
Kickback. You got it. Which insulation has a higher R value? Closed cell, spray foam, or dense packed cellulose?
Per inch?
Closed
cell. Yeah, closed cell.
Which has lower embodied carbon?
That's cellulose, for
nice.
Sure.
All right, man, you're doing good.
We
trained you well. How many lateral load connectors does a deck need?
It doesn't need any, but if you include them, it needs to be 2 at least. Depending on the type you're using. There's another kind that requires 4, but yeah.
I think I just learned something.
Yeah.
Okay, your framing better be level, square, and what?
Plum.
Yes. PVC trim expands in which directions?
All.
Wow. Okay, final question. Do I need a vapor barrier?
Do you need a vapor barrier? No.
All right, Matt, you passed with flying colors.
Sweet.
And I would just say one more time, I think on behalf of everyone on the Fine Homebuilding team and our audience, thank you so much for all you've done for the past few years.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's been a blast, guys. It's actually been 4 years, not 2, but
Yeah.
I have been deputy editor for about 2 years now.
Well said, Brian. And boy, we're gonna miss you, Matt. I'm happy for you, but it sucks anyway. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Don't make me cry, guys.
at least he's close by. So maybe we need to take some days off and go like harass him on his job sites.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be fun.
we're gonna ask you all kinds of questions about what you're doing.
Yeah.
You sure that goes there?
What are you doing that for? What is that?
It's on the plans.
Do you have any parting thoughts for our listeners, Matt?
Yeah. Keep craft alive. Happy building.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Drop mic.